Hello, in this video I'm going to talk about the ReplaceOne and the ReplaceLast operators in DIVEX. And this example here is written in a language called Composition Language 1, and if you understand C#, you should be able to understand most of the code here. So here I have an interface called iLogger. It has a single method called log, which takes a single message parameter, right? I have two implementations of this interface. The first one is console logger, which simply writes the message to the console with this prefix. Okay. The second implementation is the file logger class. This class takes a file name parameter in the constructor, and then when it's asked to log, it's supposed to write the message to the file, but here I'm just simulating this by writing to the console the fact that we are writing to the file and then the message, right? Okay. So here I have another implementation of this iLogger interface, which is basically a composite logger. So this composite logger class, it takes an array of loggers, and then when asked to log, it loops through all the loggers and asks them to log the message, right? So what this allows us to do is, if there's a class that expects a single logger, we are able to provide it with multiple loggers, right? And this is an application of the composite pattern. Okay, so here I have a consumer class of the iLogger interface. It's called processor. Here it takes a dependency on iLogger, and it has a single method called process. It takes a data parameter, and it simply uses the logger to log processing data, and then the data parameter, right? Okay. So here in the program class, in the main method, I'm composing those functions, right? Okay. So in DIVEX, we can treat a class constructor as a function, and I have talked about this in a previous video. So basically, by using the name of the processor class here, I'm treating the processor class constructor as a function. So basically, this function takes a logger, which is the parameter of the constructor, and it returns a processor object, right? And here I'm using the replace operator in DIVEX, but using the square bracket syntax to say that I want to use a console logger for the logger parameter of processor, right? And console logger here is basically the constructor of the console logger class, right? Okay, so if I look at the signature of this create processor console logging function, it takes nothing, right? Because we have satisfied all dependencies, and it returns a processor object, right? Okay, so I can call this function here to create a processor object, right? And then I can call the process method passing book as a value for the data parameter, right? Okay, so this is a basic usage of the replace operator, which I talked about in a previous video. Okay, so here I'm doing the same thing, but I'm using file logger instead of console logger, right? And because file logger has a parameter called file name, the signature of this function here, it requires a file name, right? Okay, and here I'm calling this function passing a file name here to create a processor object, and then I'm calling process on that object. Okay, here I'm doing the exact same thing, except I'm fixing the value of the file name before I inject file logger as a value for the logger parameter of the processor class constructor, right? Okay, now what I showed you so far is related to the replace operator, right? Now here comes the part where I talk about the ReplaceOne and the ReplaceLast operators. So here I'm injecting the composite logger class as a value for the logger parameter of the processor class, right? So if I look at the signature of this function here, it requires an array of loggers, right? And this dependency, it comes from the composite logger class, right? Now here I'm calling this function normally and passing a simple array, and this array contains a console logger and a file logger, right? Okay, so here I'm using the ReplaceOne and the ReplaceLast operators. So the ReplaceOne operator is the same as the replace operator, but it works for arrays. So basically what I'm saying here, I want to specify a value for one of the loggers. So if I look at the signature of the function returned by ReplaceOne, this function still takes a loggers parameter. So basically, we injected console logger as the first item in the array, but then this array here, basically, it allows us to inject more items into the array, right? So I can use ReplaceOne multiple times, each time injecting one logger, right? And here I'm using ReplaceLast to inject the last logger, right? And ReplaceLast acts exactly as ReplaceOne in that it injects a value for one item in the array, but the resulting function from ReplaceLast doesn't contain the array parameter. And this is why it's called ReplaceLast. It basically injects the last item in the array. Okay, so with ReplaceOne and ReplaceLast, you usually invoke ReplaceOne multiple times, and then in the end you use ReplaceLast to inject the last item. Okay, so here I'm invoking this function, passing the file name, which is a dependency of the file logger, right? This gives me back a processor object on which I'm calling the process method, right? Okay, and this file name parameter, this was bubbled up from the file logger class, right? And so basically ReplaceOne and ReplaceLast, like other DIVEX operators, they allow you to inject functions even if they contain extra parameters, and these extra parameters will be bubbled up to the resulting functions, right? So here's another example, and here I'm calling ReplaceOne twice. The first time I'm injecting a console logger, and the second time I'm injecting a file logger, right? So if I look at the signature of the function returned by the second invocation of ReplaceOne, it takes a file name here, and this is a parameter of the file logger class, and it still takes the loggers parameter, right? Because ReplaceOne allows you to further provide more values into the array, right? And here I'm using ReplaceLast and injecting a lambda as a value, right? So here what I'm saying, I want this lambda to be injected as the last item in the array, right? And what I'm doing here, I'm simply passing a function that takes a logger parameter named custom logger, and this lambda simply returns this custom logger. So what I'm doing here is basically I want the resulting function to allow me to pass a third logger, but I want to keep this third logger undecided. So let me show you the signature of the resulting function to explain this. So this is the signature of the resulting function. It takes a file name parameter, which is a parameter of the file logger class, and then it takes a single iLogger parameter called custom logger, and the type here is iLogger, not iLogger array, right? Okay, so basically this is a way to inject two loggers, but then allow the consumer to supply one more logger, right? Okay, and here I'm calling this function, passing the file name parameter for the file logger, right? And then I'm also passing a value for the custom logger parameter, right? And here I'm choosing a file logger. Okay, so here this is another example where I don't use the ReplaceLast operator. So here I'm injecting console logger as the first logger, file logger as the second logger, and then I'm simply renaming the loggers parameter to custom loggers. So if I look at the signature of this function here, it takes a file name for the file logger, and here I still have a parameter of type iLogger array, but I renamed it to custom loggers. So basically what I'm saying here, I want the consumer to be able to supply not just one logger like before, but multiple loggers, right? Okay. And here I'm calling this function, I'm passing a value for the file name parameter of file logger, and then I'm passing a value for the custom loggers parameter, which is an array of loggers, right? Okay, so in this video I have showed you multiple examples about ReplaceOne and ReplaceLast, and I have showed you how you can decide on some items of array parameters and keep the rest of the array undecided, right? And you have flexibility about what you want to keep undecided. So in one example, we fixed 2 loggers and kept only 1 logger undecided, right? But then in another example, we fixed 2 loggers and we kept a whole array of loggers undecided, right? Okay, so I can run this example using Ctrl+Shift and X, and this is the result of the multiple invocations that we did. Okay, so again, these operators demonstrate how DIVEX is about the ability to fix certain things and then leave other things unfixed or undecided, right? Okay, so if you would like to learn more about DIVEX, please subscribe to this channel, and if you like this video, please hit the like button. Okay, thank you for watching.